Hello everyone, Nicolette here with Gab-Nic Excelsior Nursing Tutoring Center. I am your study buddy. So we are going to continue with fluid and electrolytes. As you have seen in the previous videos, I'm going to be reading the Saunders book. It's right in front of me. And as I read, I will pause and expound or explain some information that I think you should know. I will try to connect the dots. I will try to make things a bit more clearer. So this is a YouTube channel for students who have a difficult time reading and understanding their NCLEX textbook. They need someone to help them understand it. It's like being in a study group, but not exactly. It's just you and I, or being with a tutor who's going every step of the way with you. Okay, so let's just dive right into it. So we left off with movement of body fluids. So description: cell membranes separate the interstitial fluid from the intravascular fluid. Cell membranes are selectively permeable, that is, the cell membrane and the capillary walls allow water and some solids free passage through them. So if you're thinking about a cell membrane, right, you're looking at this top here, you're thinking about the surroundings. Inside is what the cell, it's like the ribosomes, the nucleus, all the information that is within the cell is in here, and the cell membrane keeps all of that intact. So now if things want to come in and out, they have to go obviously through the cell membrane. So they say the cell membrane capillary walls allow water and some solids free passage through them. Several forces affect the movement of water and solids through the walls of cells and capillaries. The greater the number of particles in a concentrated solution, the more pull there will be to move the water through the membrane. Again, the greater the number of particles are solids, particles are hard substances, particles are not water. Right? So the greater number of particles in a concentrated solution, the more pull there will be to move the water through the membrane. And when you think of pull, think of what is it called? Not osmosis, but oncotic pressure. So oncotic pressure is pulling pressure. So proteins have oncotic pressure. So if there's a lot of proteins in a place, it's going to pull the blood, the liquid to it, right? It's going to keep it inside the blood vessels. And that's exactly what happens. If your protein leaves your blood vessels, then it's going to do that job outside. So it's going to pull the blood outside of the blood vessel. So we want to keep our proteins inside. So when you think of pulling, you think of concentration, also think of proteins, because proteins are big substances that remain inside the blood vessels, and they pull fluids and help them to remain inside the blood vessels. If the body loses more electrolytes than fluids, as can happen with diarrhea, then the extracellular fluid will contain fewer electrolytes or less solute than the intracellular fluid. Makes sense, right? So electrolytes are particles, right? Sodium, potassium, those are electrolytes. So if the body loses those, more of those than fluids, like in diarrhea, then it says the extracellular fluid will contain fewer electrolytes or less solute than the intracellular. Okay, so fluids and electrolytes must be kept in balance for health. So we know that your body has to remain in equilibrium. When they remain out of balance, death can occur. Now we're going to look at isotonic solutions. When the solutions on both sides of a selective permeable membrane have established equilibrium or are equal in concentration, they are then isotonic. So we have substances in here and substances out here, right? So if the quantity of solutes equal the quantity of solutes out here, there's not going to be any transfer or any movement. They're going to have the same amount of pull or push to each other, so there's no movement. That's what it's saying here. Isotonic solutions are isotonic to human cells, and thus there will be very little osmosis, right? Osmosis is the pushing, right? So we said the osmosis is the movement of water, right? So water will not move from one place to another in isotonic situations because both sides are at equilibrium to each other. Hypotonic solutions. So since before I go to a hypotonic, so we can mention some isotonic solutions, and they are zero point 0.9 normal saline and 5 dextrose in water. Also 5 dextrose in 0.25 saline. Also lactate ringer solution. So the ones they usually use the most is lactate ringer, 5 dextrose in water, and zero point 0.5 saline. But zero point 0.5 saline is mostly used. It's used even more than the other 3 that I already mentioned. So know that those are isotonic because our body fluid has the same amount of, if it says 0 0.9, that 0 0.9 saline, normal saline, our body has the same measurement of fluids or measurement of solutes in the solution. So when you put something that equals the same amount that your body fluids has, they're not going to transfer any particles, any fluids across the membrane barrier. Okay, now we move to the hypotonic solution. When a solution contains a lower concentration of salt or solute than other solutions, it is hypotonic. So when I tell people to think about iso, hypo, hyper, I say that we already know what the first word is in hypo. Hypo is low. Hypo is low, right? And then tonic, you think of salts. Tonic is a salt, right? So then low salt. So now if you have low salts, you have a lot of water, right? Because it's a solution, it's a mixture, right? You have the solutes, you have the salts that are mixed in fluid or water. But in this solution, there is more water than salts. So when a solute contains a lower concentration of salts, less salt, or solute than other solution, it is a hypotonic. So a hypotonic solution has less salt or more water than an isotonic solution. Hypotonic solutions are hypotonic to the cell. Therefore, osmosis would continue in an attempt to bring about balance or equality. So which way will it go? So if the solution is isotonic, the solution is going to be out here, and this is where the cell is. So the solution is all around the cell. You put a hypotonic solution, a solution that has low salt and lots of water. So now the osmosis, what will happen is now the concentration in here is more, it has more salt in here than out here. So now water likes to share, right? So the water says, oh my gosh, there's so much of me out here and there's so little in there. So I'm going to transfer the water in here so that we can dilute in here, right? So the water out here in the hypotonic solution is going to move into this cell, which means this cell is going to swell, right? So then we have hypertonic solution. So, the other way I try to tell people to remember this is a big fat hippo, right? So a hippopotamus is huge and big and it sits in water, right? So then that's a way that I try to remember. Hypotonic, hippopotamus. I don't know if it makes sense to you. It makes sense to me when I was studying it. So hypertonic solution, a solution that has a higher concentration of solutes than other solution is a hypertonic solution. So a hypertonic solution is a solution that has a lot of salts. Hyper is high. You're excited, you're hyper, you're moving around, jumping around, whatever, that's hyper. So if the salt is hyper, there's a lot of salts, right? And then the water is less, right? So now if you put that solution out here and the cell is here, now that means the concentration of salt out here is more than here. That means the water in here is more than out here. So since the water is what's going to be moving, it's going to move out of the cell to try to make the outside area more balanced. So in a hypertonic solution, it's going to absorb, it's going to pull out the water. The water is going to come out of the cell, so the cell is going to shrink. So with a isotonic, nothing happens. Hypotonic, water comes out here into the cell swells. Hypertonic, water comes outside of the cell into the outer atmosphere, and the cell will shrink. So when the solutions on each side of the selective permeable membrane are equal to the concentration, they are isotonic. So as soon as movement starts happening, and now will become equilibrium, or they will come to equilibrium, now they're going to be isotonic. A hypotonic solution has less solute than a isotonic solution, whereas a hypertonic solution contains more solutes, which makes sense. We talked about that, right? So now let's talk about active transport. Active transport, if an ion is to move through a membrane from an area of low concentration to an area of higher concentration, an active transport system is necessary. So it says from moving from a membrane of lower concentration to an area of higher concentration, active transport is required. Why is that? Because it's moving against gravity, right? It's moving against the gradient. So everything tends to fall, to flow, to go down, right? Even you and I, it's easier for us to climb down the stairs than it is to go up the stairs. It's easier to go down a hill than it is to go up a hill. So if you're going to go up a hill, everything is going to have to work harder. Your legs, your lungs, your heart, all of that. Same thing with the cells. If they're going to have to go from a place where if it's a lot here and it's going down, it's easy for it to flow. But if there's a lot here and it needs to go up, then it has to move against gravity. So you're going to need energy, and that energy is work. So that's why it's called active. I'm going to have to be in action, active, right? So that needs so active transport system is necessary. An active transport system moves molecules or ions uphill against concentration and osmotic pressure, right? We just said that. Osmotic pressure is pushing pressure. So osmotic pressure push things out, right? So remember we said osmotic pressure is pushing pressure, and oncotic pressure is pulling pressure. So if something is being pushed down and you have to go against that push, you're going to need a lot of energy. So that's why you're going to need active transport. Metabolic processes in the cell supply the energy for active transport. Metabolic processes means the things that are happening inside the cell, right? So your ribosomes, are going to produce energy, they have proteins, and all of the workings of the cell will eventually produce ATP at some point, and ATP is energy, right? So you need ATP, you need energy, and these things are a byproduct of the metabolism that's happening inside your cell. When your cell breaks down things and make things and whatever, it's going to go through what's called the Krebs cycle or the glycolysis cycle. If you learned that in bio, if you remember it from bio, you'll remember that those are metabolic processes and they produce ATP. That is the energy that your body needs to do active transport, or to have active transport work. Substances that are actively transported through the cell membranes include ions of sodium, potassium, calcium, iron, and hydrogen, some sugars, and amino acids. Again, substances that are actively transported through the cell includes ions of sodium, potassium, calcium, ions. So the thing is, when you think about like the heart, right, and how it needs, you need calcium channel blockers, all of that. So that takes a lot of energy. So I want you to think about that, right? Because it says you need active transport to move sodium, right? And sodium channels in your lungs. It also says calcium channels. So calcium. So remember I said calcium. Calcium. What did I just say? I forgot what I just said. And then there's the potassium also. And all of this comes into play when we think about the heart. When we study the cardiac, or the heart, we will see that potassium is a very serious electrolyte that your body cannot lack, because then it will affect the workings of your heart. I said sodium channels. No, I said beta blockers. I said beta blockers. Calcium channel blockers, those are a type of medication that you can use as well. Anyway, so I'm just saying this so that you can kind of connect the dots, so you can see how you need a lot of activity so that your heart can beat well, right? And so that takes a lot of energy, and that's why the heart, even with this too, we know that the heart is an organ that beats on its own. You could remove the heart outside and it works on itself, right, by itself. So all of that can help your mind think about how important calcium, potassium, and sodium are for the body, for the workings of the body, especially the heart. Because when we come into cardiac, we'll see how important calcium and potassium especially are for the heart. Okay, so we need active transport for sodium, potassium, calcium, ions, hydrogen, some sugars, and some amino acids, right? Amino acids are proteins, and they're the workup of DNA. They are what DNA are made of. Okay. Okay, so we're going to stop here for movement of body fluids.